Vermont Air National Guard could not share details of the operation nor confirm to us if the Green Mountain Boys were involved in the airstrikes. As we've reported, the Vermont Air National Guard deployed to the Caribbean ahead of these strikes. They've been staging at an airbase in Puerto Rico, but General Greg Knight, the commander of the Vermont Guard, confirms to Channel 3 News all of the Green Mountain Boys are safe. We continue to work this angle of the story and will bring you any news as it develops. And leaders from Vermont's congressional delegation responded to the attack. Senator Bernie Sanders said in part, quote, "The President of the United States does not have the right to unilaterally take this country to war, even against a corrupt and brutal dictator like Maduro. The United States does not have the right, as Trump stated this morning, to, quote, run Venezuela. Congress must immediately pass a war powers resolution to end this illegal military operation and reassert its constitutional responsibilities." Senator Peter Welch responded by saying in part, quote, "This attack on Venezuela was illegal, unconstitutional, and reckless. President Trump's hunger for a regime change war makes it clear he doesn't care about how this unauthorized and illegal action could cause further chaos and suffering in Venezuela." And Representative Becca Balint posted on social media, quote, "So much for no foreign wars. The president has no legal authority to attack another country or its leader. He must be held accountable." We'll have full statements and other local reactions on our website.